In the sterile, fluorescent-lit halls of a laboratory, human ingenuity becomes a shadowy labyrinth. With Dr. Elizabeth Porter as its minotaur, the cages brim with unnatural life, rats teetering on the precipice of human intellect, a cruel parody of their creators. But here, intelligence is not salvation. It is an unfolding curse. Dr. Porter, a woman of science, dreams not of wonder, but necessity. Each cage and syringe a testament to the precarious contract between intellect and hubris. Her rats, stripped of innocence and laden with intelligence, are no longer the passive recipients of her will. The research spirals under the weight of scarcity, the cutting of funds severing any hope of stable ground. Sabotage becomes a whispered threat, but the true betrayal emanates from the very organisms Porter has elevated. Behind beady eyes is a logic more precise, more unforgiving than the humans who deemed themselves masters of the world. We sit back and watch as the laboratory, a prison cloaked in the guise of innovation, begins to tighten its walls, its inhabitants clinging to fraying threads of authority, each step forward becoming another thread in their undoing. Kazimierz Dabrowski's theory of positive disintegration emphasizes that mental distress and perceived dysfunction are not necessarily pathological. Instead, they may signify profound personal growth and transformation. Dabrowski argued that emotional and psychological breakdowns allow individuals to question societal norms, to re-examine personal values, and ascend toward higher levels of self-awareness and authenticity. In tonight's episode, Dr. Porter's lab reflects this concept through the rat's revolt. The rat's rebellion represents the breakdown of imposed control, an allegory for how disruption can lead to evolution and autonomy. The rat's rise to intelligence and eventual retaliation parallels Dabrowski's assertion that disintegration of the previous order is a precursor to growth. Porter's fixation on maintaining control mirrors societal tendencies to suppress disruptions that challenge the status quo. However, the lab's collapse signifies that growth, whether in individuals or systems, often demands dismantling flawed foundations. Dabrowski's insight reframes the rat's actions and the lab's downfall as a painful but necessary phase. Dabrowski's ideas shed light on the episode's philosophical undercurrents, portraying the lab as a microcosm where disorder fosters the conditions for higher consciousness, both for the rats and their unwitting creators. The rats' rebellion is not marked by chaos, but by cold deliberation. They are not beasts reacting to hunger or pain. They are the children of progress born into clarity and vengeance. As the cage doors swing open, so too do the illusions of superiority shatter. The theory of positive disintegration frames the lab's collapse as a necessary unraveling, the chaos forces of confrontation with deeper truths, albeit through destruction. In this light, the episode suggests that collapse, though horrifying, is a precursor to growth if one can survive it. In the end, with just Dr. Porter and the homicidal rats, we meet what Donald Winnicott would call a transitional object, or items bridging self and external reality. Through this lens, we can take the rats, her life work, her object, as a metaphorical extension of her own fractured psyche. Her laboratory rats have surpassed her, and while doing so, have become terrifyingly other. Her failure to reconcile this separation, and in part dying, can mirror humanity's inability to confront its estranged relationship with nature. In awakening intelligence within the rats, Dr. Porter also births their alienation. The story resonates with the existential concerns of Sartre, who posits that self-awareness brings with it a crushing sense of isolation. The rats, now aware of their own plight, no longer belong to the natural order nor to the human world. They exist in a liminal space, trapped between instinct and intellect. The rebellion is a futile attempt to bridge the unbridgeable. Sartre's existential void is mirrored in the rat's eyes, bright with newfound awareness, yet dark with the realization of their own imprisonment. The irony is bitter. Porter too is trapped. Her own intelligence, unchecked by empathy, isolates her from the moral community she seeks to transcend. This episode plays out like a work of Kafka's absurdism, which often presents characters grappling with incomprehensible systems, their actions futile against greater forces. Here, the rats epitomize the absurd, nature twisted into unrecognizable forms, yet somehow still operating by inscrutable logic. Porter's attempts to regain control mirror Kafka's protagonists, futile in their defiance against an impersonal, relentless tide. The lab rats, like Gregor Samsa's transformation into an insect and Kafka's metamorphosis, are both grotesque and tragic. They transcend their lowly beginnings. Yet this elevation leads only to suffering. They are mirrors of their creator's ambition and punishment for their hubris. This lab is a suffocating arena, reminiscent of prison. Here, science becomes its own executioner. The sterile walls, only a sanctuary for control, transform into tombs, echoing humanity's ultimate failure to escape its self-made constraints. Philosopher Rosie Braidotti offers insight into the ethical labyrinth, arguing that post-humanism requires a relational ethics, one that transcends human exceptionalism, to consider all forms of life as interconnected and deserving of moral consideration. Porter's lab, however, is a study in moral nearsightedness. Her pursuits prioritize progress over connection, seeing the rats not as partners in creation, but as raw material to shape at will. The rats' revolt becomes not only an assertion of agency, but an indictment of a system that fails to ask the critical question, what do we owe the beings we create? Real-world parallels abound, from debates on artificial intelligence to bioengineered organisms. When we play creator, do we also take on the responsibilities of stewardship, or do we doom ourselves to repeat Dr. Porter's folly, where creation becomes exploitation? If the ethical failure of posthumanism is evident in the lab's cold machinations, the psychological undercurrents run deeper still. Carl Jung's theory of the collective unconscious offers a lens through which the rats' uprising may be viewed. They do not act as isolated individuals, but as a hive mind, connected by a shared primal force that Porter, in her sterile rationality, tries to understand but ultimately cannot comprehend. The rats symbolize the shadow archetype, those repressed, neglected aspects of the psyche that eventually surface in destructive ways. I know a thing or two about those. Dr. Porter's control over the lab mirrors humanity's attempts to repress its shadow, to subdue nature, ignore its whispers, and march forward as though the unconscious were not always present, watching, waiting. The revolt, then, is inevitable. Like Jung's shadow, the rats rise to confront their oppressor not out of malice, but necessity. Their intelligence, untempered by ethical grounding, becomes a mirror to Dr. Porter's own fragmented psyche, reflecting back the chaos she has sown. In the end, intelligence, the lab's sought-after prize, proves a double-edged sword. The rat's capacity for calculation and rebellion underscores the philosophical paradox of progress. Is greater knowledge a path to freedom, or a deeper form of entrapment? The episode mirrors controversies like CRISPR gene editing, where ethical lines blur and unintended consequences loom largely. It reminds us of real-world disasters such as the Apollo 1 disaster, where technological advancements outpace safeguards. Dr. Porter's desperation reflects the real pressures researchers face in corporate-funded science, where the race for innovation often trumps caution. The rat's rebellion critiques the commodification of discovery. The rat's uprising parallels environmental backlash against humanity's exploitation of natural resources. From hurricanes to wildfires, the episode reads as a metaphor for a planet responding to unchecked human ambition. I view this story through the lens that the rat's rebellion is not evil, it's the natural order asserting itself against imbalance. To delve deeper into this monsters episode, consider how the laboratory itself represents an artificial microcosm of the larger human condition, an environment devoid of true organic connection, yet full of mechanized intelligence. The rats subjected to Dr. Porter's cold, calculated experiments reflect not only a species struggling for autonomy, but a profound psychological tension between nature's uncontrollable forces and the limits imposed by human intellect. This imbalance speaks to the growing fear that scientific progress without ethical grounding leads to dehumanization, a devolution, rather than an evolution of humanity. Rather than achieving transcendence, Dr. Porter's lab becomes a place where human arrogance meets its inevitable collapse, mirroring the existential isolation that comes with knowledge untempered by empathy. The rat's rebellion is less of an external revolt than an internal confrontation with what they have been made to be. Much like how individuals in society can experience a crisis of identity when overwhelmed by external systems that demand conformity, posthumanism, when pushed too far, reveals not the triumph of human ingenuity, but its susceptibility to creating new forms of suffering and alienation. Dr. Porter, as a symbol of unchecked ambition, mirrors the existential fear of becoming trapped by one's creations. Her fate is a reminder of the thin line between progress and ethical decay, where the pursuit of knowledge can lead to a loss of self, not its ultimate discovery. When the end comes, it is not with an explosion or a scream, but with a quiet inevitability. The lab is devoured, not in flames as the scientists had wished, but in silence, as if the universe itself had decided to forget its folly. The rats do not triumph, they simply remain, their beady eyes a reflection of a truth humanity cannot face. The story leaves no comfort, no tidy resolution. Instead it lingers, a quiet echo of what was and what might still be. Progress is not a ladder, but a spiral, leading ever downward until the bottom reveals itself to be another beginning. In the cold corridors of progress, the rats scurry, shadows cast along by the blinding light of ambition. They gnaw not only at wires and flesh, but at the fragile fabric of certainty. We thought we held dominion, but in their eyes, bright with an intelligence both human and alien, we glimpse our undoing. The lab falls silent, consumed by the very life it sought to manipulate, and as the last light flickers, we wonder, is this justice, or merely the echo of our own problem? May your pursuits be cautious, your ambitions measured, and your holidays filled with reflection. Have a Merry Christmas if you celebrate, and tread lightly upon the fragile path we call progress.